the reason that I made this class is because I've seen so much disparaging things, specifically about hoodoo, here recently from very popular people that really, I would say, I won't say that it irritated me, it disappointed me. On top of that, I see a lot of black Christians who continue to, I don't want to say attack, because if you know how Christianity works, they feel like it's their duty to reach out to people and try to convert them. But it's getting to the point where it's happening so much. I delete maybe, I would say 50 comments a week from Christians off of my page. And they're under the impression that hoodoo is some type of dark demonic belief system, and it's not. None of the African derived belief systems or African traditional belief systems are demonic or dark. That's just the way that the world has presented it. So that is what this class is about. Not only am I going to clear up some things about hoodoo, but as well as Black spirituality overall. So that's what this class is about. So if you want to know the truth about hoodoo, you can stay. I try not to teach other people's belief systems, so that's why there's a heavy concentration on hoodoo, but I still want you to apply all of that to other belief systems in the diaspora, because none of them are demonic or evil. And once again, if you did not download the class materials, they are in my link in my bio. It's the very first link on the link tree. Okay, it's going to be 7 o'clock. So I am going to go over the class rules real quick. Woo, that was so before we get started, I want to lay out a few ground rules to keep the space respectful, open, and focused on learning. Please note that this class is designed for beginners, so everything will be explained in a clear and accessible way. That is why I give you guys vocabulary words, and that's why I stop while I'm talking to explain, break things down. It's not because I think you guys are slow or anything like that. It's because I want you to understand. Hey! So, advanced questions are welcome, but I ask that you please honor the pace of the room. So, rule number 1, this is based on my experience. Everything that I am sharing comes from my personal journey, my studies, my mentors, retreats that I have been on, my own research. So take what resonates with you and leave what doesn't. Nothing I say is absolute truth. I literally want y'all to fact check everything that I tell you. Everything. Number 2, respect different perspectives. Everyone's spiritual path is unique. What works for one person may not work for another, and that is okay. This is a space for learning, not debating or invalidating someone's beliefs. Number 3, keep the chat positive and respectful. Disrespect, negativity, or trolling won't be tolerated. You will be removed by one of my moderators immediately. There's no second chance. You will be removed immediately because it's distracting. Number 4, no unsolicited advice or corrections. So this basically means unless I ask for input, please allow me to teach without interruptions with what people would consider corrections. If you have a different approach, that is beautiful. This class is centered around what works for me. The only exception to this rule is after I get done teaching, y'all can debate with me. You can correct anything that I'm talking about. You can say whatever you want to. Just don't do it during the class. Number 5, no gatekeeping or one right way of thinking. Spiritual work is diverse and traditions vary. There is no single correct way to do things, only what is true and effective for you. So, because of the topic of this class, I do have an extra rule. I added this rule just for this class. Please do not enter this class attempting to derail the discussion with arguments like black is a color. I'm well aware of that. We are not African. Okay, I know that some people are Afro-Indigenous. I'm well aware of that. I'm educated on both African Americans and Afro-Indigenous Americans. You don't have to tell me that. Language evolves constantly, especially within communities and cultures that repurpose words to describe shared history, cultural, and social experiences. So in this class, when I use the term Black, it's being used with the widely understood cultural meaning. Okay, the social context, which is referring to people of African and Afro-Indigenous descent. So African diasporic identity. That is what I'm talking about when I say the word Black in this class. I don't need you to tell me that it's a color. Okay, that's irritating. So this class is rooted in metaphysics and spiritual science. So there isn't any single religion or tradition. However, I will be going over hoodoo. So if I mention any closed or lineage-based traditions in my classes, that includes those that are protected by bloodline, initiation, or cultural restriction, I am doing it as shared instruction, okay? I am not teaching you any secrets or anything like that. So me teaching you doesn't give you the permission to practice, okay? Because I will be mentioning hoodoo. It won't be information that you can use to practice, but some people be like, you're teaching it publicly, so that means I can join. No, the fuck it does not, okay? So I'm going to say this again. If you just came in and you have not downloaded the class material, so it'll be easy for you to go, follow along. And it also has vocabulary and things because I will be using words that a lot of people may not be familiar with. You can download this by clicking the link that's in my bio. And it's the first link. Hey, Mom. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And as you know, I'm going to zoom in on the board so you guys can follow along for those who don't have the class material. I had to write very small. Can y'all read that? Okay, cool. So, as y'all know, I always do an introduction first. So, section 1 is really the introduction. Because before we can even start discussing what people call black magic, you have to first understand that a lot of people have been trained to emotionally react to those words before they ever stop to actually think about what they mean. For generations, the word black, dark, primitive, savage, and demonic have been repeatedly attached to Black people, Black spirituality, Black traditions, and Black cultural expression through religion, media, colonization, and educational systems, and propaganda. So over time, those repeated associations created psychological conditioning, meaning that people started to subconsciously connect Blackness with fear, danger, evil, chaos, or moral corruption without always realizing where those ideas even came from. So the demonization of African and Afro-Indigenous people derived spirit, not just people, but their spiritual systems as well, happened alongside the demonization of Black identity itself. So, what is Black identity? Can anybody guess what I mean when I say Black identity? Because it's not just skin color. So, no guesses? Okay. Yes, that is one, Tiffany. Yes, Mama Sunfire said the same. Everybody's saying it. Yes, that is literally the first thing that I put on the list. It is collective culture, historical, emotional, spiritual, and social experiences that shape through the lives, survival, traditions, adaptations, and shared history of people of African and Afro-Indigenous descent. It includes language patterns, music, food traditions, hairstyles, spirituality, movement, storytelling, influence. Yes, that is one too. Emotional expression, community structures, survival strategies, and cultural memory that's passed down across generations. And if you don't know what cultural memory is, just in case, it's the way knowledge, behavior, beliefs, and emotional experiences are preserved and transferred within communities over a long period of time. So for African Americans specifically, Black identity was shaped not only through African and Afro-Indigenous origins, but also through the experience of slavery, segregation, forced displacement, resistance, adaptation, survival, and the rebuilding of culture under oppression. So this is important because when we talk about the demonization of Black spirituality, we are not just discussing isolated rituals, okay, or random beliefs. We are talking about the way entire systems of Black cultural expression, survival, emotional processing, and ancestral knowledge became associated with fear, danger, primitiveness. I keep using that word because they used to say that we were primitive, or evil through centuries of conditioning and propaganda. So when we hear the term Black magic, most people immediately imagine something evil, destructive, dangerous, or forbidden. But historically, a lot of what was labeled Black magic was really African and Afro-Indigenous retention, which refers to the cultural and spiritual knowledge that was carried forward and preserved by Black people and their descendants despite slavery, colonization, forced conversion, displacement. These traditions included drumming, rhythm, ancestor reverence, herbal knowledge, collective rituals, prayer systems, storytelling. I keep saying storytelling because that's important. Emotional expression, trance-like states, spiritual bathing, divination, and community-based healing practices. A lot of these systems functioned as survival technologies within African, Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, you get where I'm going, African-American communities. They were methods of preserving identity, regulating emotion, strengthening community bonds, communicating spiritual beliefs. Hello, Lamonte. Processing grief, and maintaining cultural memory under violent conditions. Thank you for the repost. One of the biggest misunderstandings people have is assuming that spirituality only exists in formal religion. But spirituality is broad. It's a broad term. And it goes far beyond organized doctrine, okay? Spiritual systems developed from the way communities interacted with emotion, nature, survival, symbolism, energy, prayer. This is a long list. Memory, collective experience. So in a lot of African and African diasporic traditions, rhythm, movement, chanting, prayer, drumming, and ritual were understood as ways of shifting emotion in spiritual states. It had nothing to do with summoning demons. So today, modern science actually supports a lot of the observations that our ancestors had. They are basically proving what our ancestors have been saying for centuries through neuroscience, psychology, and nervous system research. So, for example, rhythm has been shown to influence brainwave activity, emotional regulation, memory processing, and group synchronization. And I'm going to go over this deeper. This is just the introduction, y'all. So brainwave entrainment, which I have went over this a lot. If y'all have attended my classes before, I talk about brainwave entrainment a lot. And that is the process of the brain adjusting itself to repeated rhythmic patterns. It basically helps explain why music, chanting, drumming, and repetitive prayer can actually alter your emotional and mental states dramatically. What one culture called spiritual activation, that's what we called it. Another culture described it as through scientific terminology, but both are observing the same exact human experience, but through different lenses. But because we use a different term, we get demonized. And that's why I tell y'all guys all the time that I believe that everybody is right. We're just using different vocabulary to express it. But the only people who are demonized is us. Thank you so much, Noni. So this is, and if you don't know, we are on this page, section 1. What is, oh, no, we're in the, yeah, what is Black Magick really? That's what we're on. So, where was I? Oh, okay. So, I was basically telling you that we're the only ones demonized, but everybody else is practicing the exact same thing using different language. So that is why it is important to understand that a lot of African diasporic practices operate through energetic principles that are unique, that are not unique to our culture. Everybody's doing it. We just do it differently. Symbolism, repetition, emotional focus, intention, vibration, ritual movement, and collective belief can be found globally in prayer traditions, meditation systems, manifestation practices, religious ceremonies, and psychological conditioning techniques. The language changes depending on the culture, but the mechanisms themselves actually overlap. So in this class, we are still going to be going over my formula that I go over every single class, because I told you you can apply it to any spiritual belief, which is down here. Which is, it's usually work equals intention plus ashe plus activation, but I have it going that way so you can see that the results are at the end. So, one of the reasons that I created this formula is because a lot of people struggle to understand spiritual systems when they are explained only through symbolism. Not everybody has a spiritual mind. Even ritual objects, some people try to explain it through aesthetics. And then there are some people who be using complicated terminology, knowing nobody knows what they're talking about. So when you break something down into the most basic structure, it becomes easier to see the pattern in everything that you do. So this formula is meant to simplify the mechanics behind a lot of forms of spiritual work by showing you that underneath different traditions, tools, languages, and rituals, if y'all were in the very first class I ever did on TikTok Live, I broke this all the way down and I showed you how this formula can be applied to any religion in the world. I might do another class like that. I might do that again. I'm not going to have time tonight, but anyway, so even though it's different traditions, different tools, different languages, and different rituals, there are shared foundational principles operating at the same time. There is intention, which gives direction and purpose. There is what I say ashe, and only because when I was taught by an elder who used that word a lot, and so now it's stuck with me. So, but ashe represents the energy, life force, its authority. It's basically the power to make things happen. Then there's activation, which is the process of bringing the intention and energy into motion, which is kinetic energy. So that is you actually doing an action such as drumming, prayer, speech, ritual, emotion, movement, focus, or any type of symbolic practice, depending on what your belief system is. And then once people understand the foundational mechanics, it becomes easier to recognize that a lot of spiritual systems around the world are operating through similar human principles, even if the cultures, symbols, and languages surrounding them look different. So the objects themselves were never the full system. The real system is always energy, intention, activation, symbolism, memory, rhythm, and collective understanding. And then another important thing that we talk about is the role colonization played to shape spiritual narratives. We're going to go back over here. We're going to go over that formula again later on in the class. This is the introduction still. So another important thing that we talk about is the role of colonization. So colonization did not only involve taking land and labor. It also involved controlling information, language, religion, and cultural perception. A lot of Black spiritual practices were interpreted through the fear and religious frameworks of colonizers, not through the understanding of the people that actually practiced them. Okay? So literally, outsiders looking in. And then they wrote books about our belief systems and published them. And we have Black folks who actually believe it, even though it was written by outsiders. So drumming became associated with danger because enslavers feared communication in organized gatherings. If you didn't know, our ancestors used to use drums to communicate with each other, similar to Morse code. Trance-like states became associated with demon possession or evil because they were unfamiliar to European religious structures. Ancestor reverence became labeled as witchcraft because it existed outside the concept of Christian frameworks. And then over time, these labels spread so aggressively that even the descendants of those same communities inherited fear towards their own ancestral traditions without fully understanding why. If you ask a Black Christian why they fear hoodoo, voodoo, Ifa, Lukumi, Palo, if you ask them why they fear it, they will not be able to tell you. They won't be able to tell you one thing about the belief system. I guarantee you. But they can tell you that it's demonic or evil. Yes. So this class, I want to put this out there. This class is not about convincing people to adopt any particular belief system. Because like I told you, I believe everybody's right. And that includes Christians. Everybody lives in their own reality, and I let them do that. This is about understanding how fear, propaganda, colonization, and historical conditioning shape the narrative around African-derived spirituality and Black cultural expression. Because once you start understanding how these associations were actually created, you will start to asking deeper questions. And the main question of this whole entire class, if Blackness itself became associated with fear, danger, primitiveness, and spiritual suspicion, why do so many traditions, styles, forms of expression, and cultural practices that originated within Black communities suddenly become more socially acceptable once they were separated from Black people or repackaged with white faces attached to them? Whether we are discussing music, fashion, slang, dancing, spirituality, emotional expression, or cultural aesthetics, there is a repeated historical pattern where the original Black source is criticized, feared, mocked, or demonized. But once that same thing is repackaged through whiteness or mainstream approval, it suddenly is viewed as innovative, edgy, fashionable. Y'all see that cloud bob? Spiritual or marketable. It's because the discomfort came from Black identity that was connected to it. It had absolutely nothing to do with the actual beliefs and practices of the Black community. Okay? The cloud bob. Like the audacity. Now, we are going to move to section 2, why everything Black was demonized. It's this page, if y'all are following along with the class materials. Hey, alignment and spiritual awakening, 222 and 77. So you are in alignment with your spiritual awakening by coming to this class. So one thing that really pushed me deeper into understanding this topic, it happened years ago. This happened a long time ago. When I used to spend a lot of time, y'all remember the Clubhouse app 1, 2, 3, 4. That means something is coming. Okay. So I originally joined because I wanted to connect with people from different cultures and backgrounds, especially other Black people across the diaspora. And then one day, this is not, I'm not talking about all Africans, and I'm specifically talking about the group of people that were in this Clubhouse app. So I entered a chat room, and there were several Africans, and they were speaking negatively about African Americans. And this was the first time I had ever experienced that amount of negative talk about African Americans from people with the same skin tone as me. I had never experienced that before. I've seen it from, colonizers, but I have never seen it ever until that day. And the conversation centered around the idea that African Americans never fought for freedom. That we somehow accepted oppression, and that our current struggles existed because we didn't resist hard enough. And as I sat there listening, I realized something. I realized that, and keep in mind, I'm an observer. I never say anything. I be watching a lot of people, and I watch their patterns and things like that. So I watch and I learn, and then I study, and then I research. But that particular conversation made me realize that a lot of people genuinely do not know the full history of African Americans in this country, especially the level of resistance, organization, spirituality, survival, and fear surrounding Black people in early America. They really don't know our history. And one of the biggest misconceptions about African Americans is the idea that we just accepted slavery and oppression without any resistance. Historically, that is completely false. Resistance started before enslaved Africans even reached America. During the Middle Passage, there were revolts on the ship. There were attempts to overthrow crews. Some ships made it to the Americas with no crew alive. The only people who were alive were the slaves that were on the ships. They did hunger strikes, sabotage the boats. People were jumping into the ocean rather than accepting captivity. They fought constantly. So the issue was not that resistance did not happen. The issue is that much of mainstream history either minimizes it or only teaches Black suffering, without fully teaching Black resistance, intelligence, and adaptation. And enslavers were not only afraid of physical rebellion, they were afraid of Black organization. They were afraid of Black spirituality, Black communication systems. Why y'all think they put those laws in place to stop us? Black emotional unity, Black gatherings. You can even gather more than 2 slaves at a time, or they would think that you were doing something. So they feared anything that allowed enslaved Africans to maintain connection to themselves and to each other. And y'all are going to see the community aspect pop up throughout this class, because I feel like we have lost community and we need to get it back. So this is one of the reasons drums were banned in multiple slave colonies throughout the Americas. In many African cultures, drums were not just instruments to us. I already added that in there. What are the Afro and originated spiritualism from the U.S.? I'm from Brazil, and we have many. We have many as well. We have a lot. I've heard of all of the ones you just listed, but we have a lot as well. So, my bad. Y'all know I get distracted. Let me stop looking at the comments. Anyway, I was telling you how drums got banned in a lot of slave colonies. And then in a lot of African cultures, drums are not instruments, just instruments. Drumming functioned as communication technology, emotional synchronization, which I'm going to go over later, historical storytelling, spiritual activation, and community organization. So you can still see this today if you ever attended any real hoodoo gatherings. So rhythm allows groups to move together emotionally and mentally. And that's when I was telling you about the emotional synchronization. That's actually a thing. So enslavers recognized that unified people are harder to control, even if they did not fully understand the science behind why. So rhythm has a direct effect on your nervous system. Just in case there is somebody who does not know, the nervous system is the communication network between your brain and your body. It controls your emotions, stress reactions, your movement, your survival instincts, your mental states. That is what the nervous system is. So repetitive rhythm can influence breathing patterns, heart rate, emotional regulation, memory processing, and group synchronization. I'm not going to go too deep in it, but just keep remembering that. So today, neuroscience uses terms like brainwave entrainment, which I go over a lot, to explain how repeated sound and rhythm can influence mental and emotional states. So group chanting, singing, prayer, and drumming can actually create emotional alignment between large groups of people. This is actually a thing. So if you've ever been to a hoodoo rally or a hoodoo ring shout, we have a bunch of things. If you've ever been to a real one, that's what they're doing. So historically, whenever African Americans created strong communities, economic independence, cultural influence, or collective organization, destruction followed. And it was because they wanted to control us. And so when they got together in these groups, especially the ring shout, this is a fun fact. They used to have a ring shout before every rebellion. And the enslavers recognized that pattern. And so they had to put a stop to it. So the fear of Black unity and emotional synchronization led to the laws that were created to ban drums, drumming circles, and African spiritual practices. So during Reconstruction, if y'all don't know what Reconstruction is, that's the period after slavery when African Americans were basically starting to build businesses, houses, schools, things like that. They were having land ownership, political power. So they were reconstructing their economy because they were no longer slaves. And we call it the Reconstruction period. So entire towns during this period, entire towns were being attacked. Businesses were being burned. Voting rights were being suppressed. And Black success became treated as a threat. And you see examples of these in Tulsa and Rosewood and a lot of other Black communities that were destroyed that they took off record. It was a lot of them that they destroyed. So fear and jealousy work together. When people feel threatened by a group's resilience, organization, creativity, spirituality, their success, they start demonizing the very things that gave that group strength. And then over time, that conditioning spreads into nearly every area connected to Black identity. Black music, in every single generation, Black music is demonized. Blues was called sinful, but now it's the good stuff. Jazz was called corruptive. Rock music demonized when Black artists pioneered it. Keep that in mind. When Black artists were pioneering it, rock music was demonized. Hip hop and rap became associated with criminals, aggression, and moral decay. Even though storytelling, rhythm, emotional transmutation, symbolism, ancestral memory, and collective expression are connected to African American spiritual culture, which is why I always say that Black Americans unknowingly carry retained hoodoo principles within their everyday life, their culture, their language, the music that our people make, and the behavior, even if they don't identify it that way consciously. Okay, which I'm going to get into that later on in the class. Okay, but anyway, even today, every generation of Black music is accused of destroying society. Literally, even by Black people. Black people have made whole think pieces, not knowing the history of how we used to put everything in our music. Not just the good stuff, the bad stuff too. I see it all the time. Black music is destroying the society. But people are ignoring the emotional processing, the storytelling, the resistance, grief, survival realities, and social conditioning that is underneath Black music. And at the same time, a lot of those same musical styles became commercially acceptable once they were separated from Black people or repackaged through whiteness. So the same pattern happened spiritually. Yes, rap music. I'm going to get deep into the music. I have a whole section about music. I was getting into the pattern of how that correlates with spirituality. So African spirituality became labeled primitive. Ancestor reverence became labeled witchcraft. Emotional expression became aggression. Rhythm became dangerous. Collective rituals became suspicious. Black emotional intensity became something to fear instead of something to understand. And then over generations, society repeatedly associated Blackness with danger, darkness, violence, chaos, and spiritual suspicion until a lot of people, even from our own communities, subconsciously accepted those associations without questioning where they came from. And this is also where respectability politics started developing inside of Black communities. And as always, just in case somebody doesn't know what that is, respectability politics is basically the idea that Black people have to behave in ways that are considered socially acceptable by the dominant society in order to even be treated humanely. That's what that is. A lot of African Americans learn to suppress parts of their culture, their spirituality, emotional expression, speech, music, or traditions as survival adaptation. The only exception is gospel music. Even though when gospel music first came out, they were saying negative stuff about it, but it became more socially acceptable because it aligned itself with Christian structures that were already recognized by white America. While other forms of Black spiritual music and other musical expressions continue being labeled dangerous, worldly, rebellious, or demonic. And that's when we get back to the deeper question that I asked in the introduction, if Blackness itself was conditioned to represent fear, danger, and spiritual suspicion in society, then how could anything connected to Black identity ever be viewed neutrally? Why is it only acceptable when it's painted with another race? Once we understand that pattern, we can finally really look at how music itself became one of the most powerful and most feared forms of Black spiritual expression in history. And that is in my opinion. I want y'all to keep in mind that nothing that I say is absolute truth. I want you to look up this stuff yourself, and I want you to draw your own conclusions. Okay, and now we're going to move to the next section, which is section 3. Did anybody have any questions? I forgot to ask. I let people ask questions between each section. And we're on this page, section 3, which says music as magic. We're going to go deeper into music in the Black community. As y'all see, I'm doing the Music Conjure series, and this will help y'all understand why I can listen to Chicago drill and still make shit move. So we're going to talk about music as magic, rhythm, frequency, and emotional technology. You're welcome. So now that we understand why Blackness itself became associated with fear and spiritual suspicion, we can finally start to discuss one of the most powerful forms of African retention that survived slavery, segregation, colonization, and cultural suppression, and that is music. So one thing that people have to understand is that music has never been just entertainment in Black spaces, ever. Music historically functioned as communication, emotional processing, spiritual activation, historical storytelling, coded language. Remember, I told you they used to use the drums to send messages. Collective healing, memory preservation, and community synchronization. And in many Black traditions, rhythm was understood as something that could move energy. And then it can also alter emotional states. And then when I'm talking about emotional synchronization, I'm talking about collective connection. It can also put everybody in the same collective state at the same time. and basically shift the whole spiritual atmosphere. So that is what music does. Okay. So let me talk about drums. I'm skipping over one part. I don't really need to say that because I already went over that. So in a lot of Black traditions, rhythm was understood as something that could move energy. And when I'm talking about rhythm, I'm talking about drumming. So, and I keep bringing up drums because drums were a communication technology, and they still are in hoodoo. So specific rhythms could send messages across distances, coordinate movement, preserve stories, announce ceremonies, or even emotionally synchronize groups of people together. I keep bringing that up. Drumming also played a role in spiritual ceremonies because rhythm directly affects your body. And I already went over that. And you can still see this today in Black churches. You can see it in hoodoo gatherings. Second line traditions, like stepping, Black marching bands, chanting, concerts, protest movements, and even the way that Black communities naturally interact with rhythm socially. Y'all ever see Black people just start hitting a beat? Call and response. Yes, I'm actually go over that. Look at me dancing. Yes, I'm going to go over that too. So one example of this survival is the ring shout tradition. So ring shouts are still practiced in hoodoo today. But they were basically spiritual gatherings practiced by enslaved Africans, Afro-Indigenous Americans, and African Americans later on, which are the descendants of those first two people, Africans and Afro-Indigenous people. So, and it involved rhythmic movement. I'm not gonna get too deep into it, but I'm gonna give you a general definition. Okay, so rhythmic movement, clapping, chanting, call and response, singing. It's crazy how you hit that. Mama, because it was literally the next thing I was going to go over. And circular motion. So on the surface, a lot of enslavers interpret these gatherings as religious worship or them being emotionally excited about something. But if you looked underneath that, those gatherings actually functioned as collective emotional release. Spiritual connection, nervous system regulation, cultural retention, because they were memorizing those chants so they wouldn't forget them because they were no longer in their homeland, and communal synchronization. So circular movement, repetitive rhythm, chanting, and emotional intensity can alter mental and emotional states. Today, psychology and neuroscience partially explains that through concepts like trance states, rhythmic synchronization, and emotional entrainment. So all the stuff that our ancestors used to do, science is now explaining it. So just in case you don't know what trance states are, they're basically altered states of awareness. And that's where your intention, your emotions, your consciousness really shift through repetition, focus, rhythm, through movement. You can go into a trance state as well. Yay! I'm glad you found my account too. So again, what people once labeled primitive or demonic are actually now being discussed now through real psychological and physiological effects that people didn't understand back then because they didn't have a scientific study for it. So music also became one of the safest ways for African Americans to preserve emotion, memory, pain, resistance, and spirituality publicly. Blues music is one of the clearest examples of emotional transmutation within Black culture. If y'all don't know what emotional transmutation is, it's basically the process. You're basically transforming emotional energy into another form of expression. Okay? So blues was not just sad music. It was grief processing, storytelling, survival language, shadow work, emotional honesty, spiritual release. And a lot of people hear the pain in blues music and then they miss the survival aspect that's underneath it. Blues allowed people to process suffering collectively without completely collapsing under it emotionally. And you will see Black folks make whole entire videos about how it has a negative frequency. It's like they're missing the plot. The same thing happened later with jazz, soul, hip hop, rap. Every single generation of Black music has carried emotional information connected to the conditions of Black people, what we were living in through the times. Jazz reflected emotional freedom and complexity. Soulful music carried vulnerability, love, spirituality, collective emotional depth. Hip hop became survival storytelling. Rap documented environmental conditions, economic struggles. You see how we use music to literally document our lives? That has been with us since we came here. And I keep saying we because we are our ancestors, whether you know it or not. So, my bad. I went off script. But anyway, so rap documented basically the economic struggle of Black people, the systemic violence of Black people, identity formation of Black people, the survival mentality. You see rap songs that have confidence building in it, literally manifesting in their songs, and people call it negative frequencies. Trap music, especially, but it functions like modern war reporting. They're literally reporting what's happening in their lives. People hear aggression or materialism on the surface, but underneath that, they are discussing survival, hypervigilance, trauma, poverty, ambition, fear, emotional numbness, manifestation language. It's making me do the puzzle thing. Can y'all still hear me? Oh. Okay. It made me do the puzzle thing to make sure I was still here. But basically, this is why I always say music itself can... a lot of people don't realize in order to... And my aunt used to say this all the time. In order to beat demons, you have to name them. And our music is literally our testimony. It's our shadow work. They are literally, instead of internalizing what's happening to them, they are transmuting it into music. And that's not, even though some of the background has like negative frequencies that go in the opposite direction, you have the power to redirect that and transmute it into something else by consciously listening to it. Just don't listen to stuff and let it go into your head. Consciously listen to it and transmute it. So, music itself can function as spiritual work depending on how it's being used. Alchemy, literally, that's exactly what it is. A lot of people hear the word magic, okay, and they immediately imagine some type of fantasy, some type of supernatural powers without understanding that emotional activation, repetition, symbolism, focused intention, which is a good one, that's the law of mentalism, and psychological influence are already scientifically observable realities. Music can shift mood, confidence, motivation, emotional release, focus, nervous system regulation, and mental conditioning. And then repetition especially matters because repeating language and repeating emotional exposure influences the subconscious mind over time. Why do you all think that they tell you that repetition is evil? They used to teach that to us in church, like repeating the same thing over and over again. They used to tell us that was evil. Where do you think they got that from to tell us that? When the whole time you can change your circumstances through repetition. The subconscious mind is part of the mind that absorbs patterns, associations, habits, and emotional programming. Okay, so that's beneath your conscious awareness. You can change that with repetition. So today, neuroscience uses terms like dopamine release, emotional memory encoding, and brainwave entrainment, which I keep going over to explain why music impacts people so deeply. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Y'all, if y'all don't know what that is, it basically, it's your pleasure center. So pleasure, motivation, reward, emotional reinforcement. And your emotional memory is basically the part of your brain that's has your emotional experiences in it, basically. That's what it is. So in brainwave entrainment, I went over it earlier, but just in case somebody else is in here, just got in here, that's basically your brain adjusting to its activity patterns in response to repetitive rhythms and sounds. So music literally interacts with your nervous system and your emotional processing centers of your brain. And it has been scientifically proven. And our ancestors have been saying it for centuries, literally. So that is why affirmation and repetition matter so much in music. That's why affirmations matter too. Even if there's no music behind it. Songs repeatedly reinforce emotional states, identities, beliefs, perspectives, and internal narratives. So some songs reinforce confidence, some grief, some rage, some vulnerability, courage, empowerment. Even outside of spirituality, people already understand this subconsciously. Y'all create whole workout playlists to increase your motivation. You're doing it unconsciously. That's why I say African Americans are practicing hoodoo and they don't know it. Okay? A lot of people get that confused when we say that people are practicing hoodoo. It's not the same thing as a practitioner of hoodoo. And I think people get that mixed up because people don't know what hoodoo actually is. They just know what white folks said it was in a book. And that's not it. So I'm not going to get too deep into that because then I'll get in trouble. But just know it's not what you think it is. So so even outside spirituality, people be making playlists for workout plans. Y'all be playing calming music when y'all have anxiety. Y'all started listening to heartbreak songs when you break up. That's shadow work and y'all don't even know y'all doing it. We use worship music to emotionally connect during prayer. Music already functions psychologically, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, whether people consciously recognize it or not. And when you do that within the Black community, you are practicing hoodoo and you don't know it. Just because you are practicing it doesn't mean that you're part of the tradition. The culture of hoodoo is separate from the practice of. Okay? So this is also why Black music has repeatedly been labeled dangerous, demonic, corruptive, or destructive throughout history. Every generation of Black music has faced moral panic. And moral panic is basically when they do a widespread fear that cultural expression is threatening society's moral order, like they do Black people all the time. They attacked blues, they attacked jazz, they attacked rock when Black artists had it. Hip hop, rap, trap music, they still attacking rap, trap music, and hip hop today. But underneath those reactions is fear surrounding Black emotional expression, because that's all the music is. Black influence, Black communication, Black autonomy, and the collective emotional power of music creates that type of music creates inside of communities. And this brings us directly into one of the biggest misunderstandings surrounding hoodoo, African spirituality, and Black cultural practices altogether. The idea that these systems are somehow disconnected from intelligence, structure, science, and deeper philosophy just because they developed outside of Western approved systems. We are literally hyper intelligent beings. And all of this stuff is being explained through science when our ancestors have been saying it for centuries. I'm going to keep saying that. So we are on section 4. Hey, Lene, the enforcer is here. So now we're going to be on section 4. Did anybody have any questions about the last section? And section 4 is about hoodoo, African spirituality, and the lies that are told about us. So this is the longest section, and it's because it's a lot of stuff that I need to address that is being said about hoodoo publicly by popular people, and it's very damaging to our community. So it needs to be addressed. And that's why I'm going to actually, my personal assistant isn't in the live today, but I'm going to get her to post this particular recording as soon as possible. And it'll be on my YouTube. And the YouTube link is in my bio. Where can you find this class? It'll be on my YouTube. The recording will be on my YouTube. If you are talking about the class materials, click the link in my bio, and it's the very first link. And you can download these. Section 4, one of the biggest problems surrounding hoodoo today is that a lot of people speak on it without actually understanding what it is. Historically, culturally, spiritually, they literally do not know what it is. And I'm talking about popular hoodoo practitioners spreading misinformation, and I'd be blown away. But a lot of misinformation surrounding hoodoo comes from outsiders attempting to redefine African American spirituality traditions through their own religious beliefs, aesthetics, personal opinions, social media trends, or commercial interest. So before we can discuss hoodoo, we first have to separate spirituality from organized religion, because those are not automatically the same thing. Organized religion centers around formal doctrine, institutions, rules, and systems of worship tied to a structured belief system. Okay? A spiritual system, which is what hoodoo is. Yes, hoodoo is Black history. It's Black culture, Black American culture. So, spiritual systems like hoodoo develop from community practices, survival methods, emotional processing, ancestral traditions, symbolism, ritual, and the relationship between people, energy, nature, and collective experience, which is the Black community, the entire Black community. Hoodoo specifically developed within African American and Afro-Indigenous communities as survival-based spiritual systems shaped by African retention or Afro-Indigenous retention, depends on what type of hoodoo you practice. Adaptation, resistance, herbal knowledge, symbolism, prayer, ancestral understanding, and community practices. It was never magic tricks or internet aesthetics. That came from white people. So hoodoo developed under conditions of slavery, segregation, violence, poverty, displacement, and forced religious conversion. Because of that, hoodoo became tied to survival, protection, emotional endurance, justice, communication, healing, adaptation, and spiritual resilience. Another thing I want to address, this is the thing that really pissed me off. Out of all the stuff that I'm about to go over, this is the one thing that made me mad. The claim that people develop religious PTSD from hoodoo. A lot of people are misunderstanding what they're actually talking about. A lot of people are not reacting to hoodoo as a spiritual system. They are reacting to forms of Black church culture, religious fear conditioning, authoritarian, I don't know how to say that word, leadership. Basically, I am a leader. Everybody is in order. There is no hierarchy in hoodoo. There never has been one. Shame-based teaching, fear of punishment, emotional control, and spiritual guilt that became heavily spread with some expressions. I'm going to say some expressions, teachings, fear of punishment, emotional control, and spiritual guilt that I see some hoodoo practitioners teaching, even though it has absolutely nothing to do with hoodoo. Yes, it came from Christianity. Christianity and hoodoo are two totally different things. Christianity is just the jacket that hoodoo wears when the wrong people are looking. Literally. None of the doctrine of Christianity is actually inside of hoodoo. That's not a thing. Look, I'm getting mad again. Let me calm down. That shit had pissed me off when I read that. Anyway, let's get back to it. So, because Christianity became the dominant religious structure forced onto African American spirituality over time, and during slavery, a lot of forms of hoodoo eventually, and you see that I said a lot of forms of hoodoo. There are multiple forms of hoodoo. Eventually blended outwardly with Black church culture, and we call them church hoodoos. As a survival adaptation, that version became the most publicly recognized and socially visible form because it was safer under white Christian society than openly practicing African spiritual systems without Christian framing attached to them. That is the only reason that Christianity is in hoodoo. And it's not in hoodoo, it's covering hoodoo. Okay? So how the fuck somebody can get religious PTSD from practicing hoodoo? They're not practicing hoodoo. They're practicing Christianity disguised as hoodoo because these pastors have quit their jobs and came over here to our shit and trying to change it. Anyway, hoodoo itself is not built around fear, shame, internal punishment, or religious control. At its core, hoodoo historically functioned as a practical survival-based spiritual system connected to protection, healing, justice, communication, emotional endurance, ancestral understanding. And I'm going to give y'all some tips later on in this class how you can spot somebody who's faking hoodoo. Okay? Adaptation and community resilience. So the issue is that people cannot separate hoodoo from the religious environments that they personally experienced growing up because of the Black church culture. It became one of the most visible spaces where African retention survived publicly, but it is not hoodoo. It can be a form of hoodoo if you go to a Kojic church, because I don't care what nobody say, they practicing hoodoo at Kojic churches. The way that they do things, but it's still not hoodoo. So then, okay, so what happened is some people leave those church spaces and then they enter hoodoo and they're still carrying those same fear-based structures, guilt systems, control dynamics, and psychological conditioning they experience inside of organized religion. And instead of fully deconstructing, fully reconnecting with actual ancestral traditions, and some of them are doing it unintentionally. Keep that in mind. A lot of them are not doing it on purpose, but they unintentionally recreate Black church culture inside of hoodoo spaces and start presenting those religious structures as if they are authentic hoodoo, and they are not. A lot of this is happening because people are trying to escape religious fear and psychological conditioning without fully deconstructing first. That's the biggest problem. So instead of separating themselves from those control systems completely, they just rename them, reshape them, and then place them into hoodoo spaces while still operating from fear, guilt, shame, paranoia, and religious anxiety. That ain't got shit to do with us. That is a personal problem for those people. Do not blame that shit on hoodoo, because that's not how hoodoo is supposed to be practiced. Another thing I want people to pay attention to is when you encounter practitioners, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. When you encounter practitioners who are constantly pushing fear, obsessively talking about demons, trying to make people terrified of spirits, when the whole time hoodoo is a spirit-based practice, we fuck with all types of spirits. It don't matter. Or making it seem like spirituality itself should always feel threatening, or you should be scared or psychologically overwhelmed, that is more than likely a major red flag. Hoodoo historically was not built on fear-based practice. It never was. It is developed as survival-based practice centered around the land, nature, protection of the Black community, wisdom of our elders, healing practices, justice practices, because we didn't have justice back then. We were our own police. Guidance, resilience, adaptation, and spiritual relationship. And I'm talking about spiritual contracts with all types of spirits. That does not mean harmful energy, negative people, spiritual conflict, and difficult experiences do not exist. I don't want y'all to think I'm saying that, okay? I want to make that clear. Every single spiritual system acknowledges imbalance and harmful intent in some form. But there is a difference between awareness and fear-based manipulation. Don't let nobody manipulate y'all into fearing anything in hoodoo, because it's not a fear-based practice at all. You should not be scared that demons are on you or coming for you. A lot of practitioners who operate entirely through fear are still functioning through religious fear conditioning, paranoia, unresolved church trauma, internet sensationalism, or commercialized spirituality designed to keep people emotionally dependent and afraid. Because what they're going to do, they're going to sell you something to keep them demons away. That's what they're going to do after they done scared the shit out of you. Be careful with that. In a lot of cases, these people are actually disconnected from the actual ancestral traditions that end up recreating the same fear structures that they experienced inside of those rigid religious environments. And all they're doing is changing the language and calling it hoodoo. Real hoodoo historically focused on empowering people to survive, adapt, protect themselves. Like, why would our ancestors create a belief system that made them fear when they were already going through hell? Like, if y'all really use common sense, y'all would, not y'all, but if a lot of stuff will be fixed with common sense. Like, why would they create a belief system like that? And they were already going through hell. But it was used to strengthen the community, understand spiritual balance, and navigate life with awareness. Not live in constant terror of invisible forces all the time. Fear-based teaching will attract attention online, but it is not the spirit of the tradition itself. That shit is fake. It's not real hoodoo. Okay? Now, we almost done. Got a little more, but we almost done with this section. Let me drink some tea. So one thing that people fail to understand is that African Americans retain spiritual principles even when they are no longer consciously recognizing them as African retention or Afro-Indigenous retention. It depends on what bloodline you come from. African retention is basically cultural and spiritual knowledge that survives across generations despite colonization. So despite conversion, despite displacement, it's still there. So this is one of the reasons why I keep saying African Americans unknowingly carry retained hoodoo principles through everyday culture, behavior, traditions, language, and emotional practices, even if they do not consciously identify them as hoodoo. That does not mean that every Black person is secretly practicing hoodoo as a spiritual practice. It means that certain survival-based cultural patterns, spiritual understandings, symbolic behaviors, superstitions, ancestral practices, they remained embedded within African American culture over generations, even though they don't recognize them as hoodoo. So any African American can practice hoodoo, but not every African American is a practitioner of hoodoo. That's what that means. For example, a lot of African American families still practice forms of cleansing rituals without labeling them spiritually, mop their floors while they're praying, clean their whole house after an argument, will open a window after argument, after death. They avoid bringing certain energy into a house. Don't bring that energy into my house. Y'all ain't never heard nobody say that? They speak blessings over their children. They pray over their food, their home, their oils, their water. And before they use it, they avoid sweeping over people's feet. That's hoodoo. They keep photographs of ancestors. Every single Black American has said that baby been here before. They go to graveyards and talk to their ancestors. That's ancestor veneration. They just don't call it that. Even storytelling itself is deeply connected to African American spiritual culture. When the Black church say, who want to testify, and everybody get up there and they want testimony, that is literal storytelling, which historically preserved survival knowledge, warnings, emotional lessons, coded communication, ancestral memory, humor. There are jokes that have been passed down in hoodoo. Grief processing, especially if you know High John the Conqueror, y'all know his jokes. I'm not going to tell them on this live, but a lot of his jokes that he made back then are still in hoodoo. People still tell those jokes. So this is one reason that I say that Black Americans are practicing, but they're just not practitioners. So now, this is also one reason why Black music carries emotional, spiritual, and psychological weight beyond entertainment, specifically for Black people, is because a lot of African Americans engage with retained spiritual principles culturally through rhythm, call and response. If y'all pay attention to Black people's songs, they do call and response all the time. Y'all call them ad-libs. They literally are calling and response, call and response. The Amigos do that shit all the time. And y'all don't even pay attention to that because y'all think that Black music is evil. And when I say y'all, I'm not talking to y'all. Keep that in mind. So, where was I? So, music functions similarly. Okay? So, even I told you testimony traditions, emotional expression is in Black music, symbolic language is used in Black music, collective grieving practices are inside of Black music. Church culture has Black music. You know, they still sing hoodoo spirituals in church today, and they don't even know that they're hoodoo spirituals. They were literally written by hoodoo practitioners for hoodoo practitioners, and they sing them in church today. Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot, Wade in the Water. But unfortunately, social media has created massive confusion around hoodoo because people now learn spirituality through short form content, aesthetics, visual misinformation, commercial marketing, and unqualified commentary. Okay, a lot of popular spiritualists speak on hoodoo historically without belonging to the culture that created it. They can't be the way that they're talking or fully understanding the conditions it developed under. Something is missing. Something's not clicking. Others intentionally spread misinformation because controversy generates views, engagement, customers, followers, social influence. I have seen this with my own eyes, spiritualists attacking hoodoo in order to elevate their own system. Presenting African American spirituality as low level, dangerous, uneducated, weak, or spiritually inferior, while promoting their tradition as more advanced, intellectual, pure, legitimate. Much of this behavior is rooted in colonized thinking, because we are not your enemy. We are literally cousins. There is no need for any of us to be downing the other. We all came from the same place. And that's why I constantly go over Reconstruction versus modernization. If you ever attended any of my hoodoo classes, I've never taught this publicly. But Reconstruction means researching, preserving, understanding, and reconnecting to historical traditions as accurately as possible. Now, modernization means changing traditions primarily to fit trends, aesthetics, popularity, commercialization, social media engagement, or mainstream comfort. Every culture evolves naturally over time. It's going to change, but there is a difference between evolution and disconnection. A lot of the confusion online comes from people removing hoodoo from its historical, cultural, and African American and Afro-Indigenous context while still attempting to profit from it, redefine it, and then be publicly teaching the shit inaccurately. The propaganda surrounding hoodoo has also existed for generations. It has been repeatedly labeled evil, primitive, criminal, ignorant, dangerous, or demonic because it existed outside of systems approved by the dominant society. At the same time, many of the psychological, emotional, symbolic, herbal, and ritual principles within hoodoo overlap the concepts that are now discussed openly. The pharmaceutical company owes hoodoo, but we're not going to get too deep into that. But if you want to learn how the pharmaceutical companies stole from the Black community, drugstores, and created the pharmaceutical companies, read the book Workin' Mojo. Or Mojo Workin'. My bad. Read that book. So, this is why understanding hoodoo requires historical literacy, cultural context, and critical thinking instead of fear-based reactions or internet stereotypes. Because once you start separating propaganda from reality, you'll start to really understand African American spirituality or Afro-Indigenous spirituality, not as a superstition or primitive behavior, but as an adaptation science, a survival intelligence, emotional technology, ancestral memory, and community-based spiritual resilience developed under some of the harshest conditions in American history. The harshest conditions in American history. It's working without a G, but yes, Mojo Working. I can show you real quick. Y'all want to take a screenshot of it? Okay. So now we're going to move to section 5. You're welcome. Where is section 5? And that's Black Magic in the Science of Survival. We only got 2 more sections after this, and then we're done, y'all. Oh, no, 3. But this one is extremely short. And 6, the rest of them are really extremely short. So we're on this one. As we have discussed throughout the class, many things connected to African American culture were historically dismissed, feared, or misunderstood because people were observing the outside of the practice without understanding the function underneath it. Once we remove the stereotypes and propaganda surrounding Black culture, you'll start to notice a lot of African American traditions were not random superstitions or meaningless habits that they try to make them out to be. They were adaptive survival systems that helped people emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, and communally, if that's a word, don't know if it is, survive generations of instability, violence, displacement, grief, chronic stress. I wish that y'all could attend a hoodoo event so you can see how we work and heal people as a community. Because the stuff that they're saying, especially these popular spiritualists, that shit is not hoodoo. Like, anyway, I already did that section. I'm not going to go back to it. What people now call Black Magic involved communities learning how to preserve themselves mentally and emotionally under conditions that were designed to break them apart. And one of the most important survival systems inside of African American culture is oral tradition. Oral tradition is passing knowledge through speech, storytelling, music, testimony, memory, jokes, warnings, sayings, and lived example instead of formal written systems. So during slavery and segregation, a lot of Black people were denied equal access to education, literacy, and institutional power, which meant that knowledge survived through conversation and memory, literally. So stories became a way to preserve emotional wisdom, historical knowledge, survival strategies, warnings, spiritual understanding, and community values. Even now, a lot of Black families still teach through storytelling without necessarily labeling it as education. Grandparents tell stories with hidden lessons inside of them. I have an aunt that used to tell me stories all the time about all of the weird spiritual shit that used to happen to them when they were kids. My mom, too, matter of fact. A lot of weird shit happened to our family members spiritually. So family sayings also carry emotional warnings. Music teaches people emotional reality. Humor becomes a survival mechanism. Testimony culture preserves lived experiences. So what outsiders dismissed as just talking carry generations of encoded information underneath it. And the same thing applies to a lot of everyday traditions within Black communities. Hair rituals, cooking traditions, dancing, prayers, circles, music, porch gatherings, call and response communication. We still do that today. Community celebrations all carried deeper social and emotional functions beyond the appearance alone. Excuse me. So hair became connected to identity, as y'all know, as Black people. Bonding, self-expression, discipline, and care. Cooking preserved family memory. Y'all, everybody has a family recipe. Creativity, resourcefulness, and emotional connection between generations. Porch traditions, if you are a hoodoo practitioner, you know what I'm talking about. Created spaces for neighborhood observation, storytelling, emotional release, community regulation, and intergenerational teaching. Prayer circles and communal gatherings created emotional synchronization during grief, hardship, celebration, and crisis. Many of these traditions helped communities regulate stress together instead of individually. Because I had a popular spiritualist one time just scrolling on Instagram, popped up talking about you're dumb if you're looking for a community in the spiritual community. What? That is not how Black spirituality has ever worked in any tradition. But anyway, this is one reason African American communities historically relied so heavily on collective environments, collective regulation in groups, emotional stabilizing, and supporting each other through shared experience. People underestimate how they underestimate how important community is to the Black community. Because if you think about it, we are literally the only ones we have. Don't nobody fuck with us for real. Yes, of course, we have allies who are human and they see what's happening and they're like, yeah, that's fucked up. But at the end of the day, we only have each other. And that's everybody. Already went over that. Okay. I told you that one was short. And this one's even shorter. We're on section 6. Okay. The difference between harmful work and demonized work. So one thing I want to make very clear before we end this class is that that's explaining demonization of African American spirituality does not mean that every spiritual practice or every spiritual action is automatically healthy, ethical, or harmless. So what I'm saying is, even though there's a difference between demonization and there actually being harmful work in hoodoo or any other tradition. Every culture, every religion, every spiritual system in the world has an example of manipulation, of abuse, harm. Y'all see the shit on TikTok. I don't even have to tell y'all this. Y'all be seeing people, I'm finna throw this at somebody. They just like be announcing the shit. So there's a lot of unethical behavior and fear tactics going around. And people, they're using spirituality irresponsibly. And the reason that they're doing that is because there's this new culture that says that anything is possible, forgetting that we are spiritual beings living a human experience. Therefore, if anything was possible as a human being, why the fuck would we be here? Like, common sense. But I just found out common sense isn't that common, actually. So I just learned that only certain brains recognize patterns in order to understand common sense. But anyway, there is also a difference between discernment and demonization. Discernment means using wisdom, observation, emotional intelligence, and critical thinking to recognize unhealthy behavior, manipulation, dishonesty, and harmful intent. So, and demonization is when entire cultures, Black people, entire identities, Black identity, or spiritual system, Black spirituality, are automatically labeled evil, primitive, dangerous, or morally corrupt without any nuance or understanding. That is what demonization means versus discernment. You can use your wisdom and know that this hoodoo practitioner is fucked up. But when you get to the point where you're saying hoodoo is fucked up, that is demonization. Do not put the actions of one practitioner on the entire belief system. Ethical conversations and historical propaganda are not the same thing. People should absolutely think critically about spiritual spaces, teachers, practitioners, including me, and communities they engage with. But critically evaluating behavior is different from automatically treating African-derived spirituality itself as evil or dangerous just because of centuries of conditioning, misinformation, and fear surrounding Black identity. Maturity in spirituality requires balance. It requires people to think critically without becoming paranoid, fearful, sensationalized. The goal should not be blind fear or blind acceptance. Neither one of them are good. The goal should be understanding, awareness, emotional intelligence, research, historical context, and discernment. Okay, this next section is extremely short as well. And this is section 7, reclaiming our Black Magick. Oh, hell. Hold on. There we go. So, after everything, I'm out of breath, y'all. After everything we discussed throughout this class, I think one of the most important things that we can do moving forward is start separating fear from understanding. Okay? A lot of people inherit shame, fear, misinformation, or discomfort surrounding African spirituality. Not just African spirituality, Black people, period. Our rhythm, our blues, our rituals, our ancestral practices, they don't like nothing about us. And they shouldn't do that without ever fully examining, including Black people in our community. I'm talking to Black people too. Y'all should not be dismissing African-derived, Afro-Indigenous practices without fully examining where those ideas come from historically and what they actually are. Once you start understanding the history behind that conditioning, it becomes easier to look at many of these traditions through a different lens. Reclaiming our understanding of what people call Black Magick is about, it's really not romanticizing everything blindly. That's bad too. And it's not about pretending harmful behavior does not exist, because it does within our tradition. I cannot lie about that. There are people who are unethical. It's about reconnecting with cultural literacy, historical awareness, discernment is a big one. and ancestral intelligence without automatically viewing Blackness through fear-based narratives. Ancestral intelligence refers to the accumulated survival knowledge, emotional wisdom, cultural understanding, adaptability, and spiritual insight passed through generations over time. A lot of things that were demonized historically were actually connected to us. Our emotional regulation, our identity preservation, our community survival. A lot of people don't realize hoodoo practitioners used to protect the entire Black community before we allowed white people to change the narrative of what hoodoo actually is. We were the protectors of the Black community. So this also requires people to start thinking differently about rhythm, prayer, emotion, like Black music is what I'm saying. Rituals and intention too, all together. Rituals is not automatically irrational because it is symbolic, okay? A lot of people get scared of the word ritual for some reason, but it just means repeating the same thing. That's all it is. Everybody does it. Every single belief system has rituals. Human beings naturally use repetition, symbolism, emotional focus, and collective behavior to create meaning, regulate emotion, process stress, strengthen identity, and reinforce belief systems. And this exists inside religion, psychology, culture, family traditions, sports, music, military structure, therapeutic practices, and everyday life. African American spiritual traditions preserved many of those principles, especially hoodoo. It literally was a preservation system that saved the history of Black history, Black culture, Black identity. That's what it is. Not fully, but it preserved it for us. For me personally, reclaiming this conversation is about reframing Blackness itself. Blackness has historically been associated with danger, evil, primitiveness, aggression, and spiritual suspicion for generations. But after really looking at the history, because keep in mind, I've been studying this stuff for a long time, since I was a teenager. Okay. So the more I looked at the history, the science, I started studying psychology 2 years ago. Survival. I am not a psychologist. I don't have a degree in it. I'm not saying I'm a psychologist. I just study human behavior. Okay. So, survival systems and cultural intelligence underneath a lot of these traditions, I'm able to see it now because of that. And I think that a lot of y'all need to start researching on your own. Go on my website, read through my PDFs, and actually look the shit up yourself. When you look it up yourself and you confirm it, it will be easier for you to accept things. And that way you can throw away what you don't agree with and keep what you really want. Okay? But I think it becomes clear what people feared is not evil itself. A lot of what people fear about Black people is not actually evil at all. They're just scared of us. They're scared of our resilience, our adaptation, our emotional power. They're scared of our creativity, our memory, our rhythm, our spirituality, and our survival. Because despite every single thing that they did to us, look where we are now. Black women are the most educated in the United States right now. Now, final section. And we're done. And this is just an overall view. I want to end the class by revisiting the statement that inspired this conversation. And I saw this statement on Facebook. So this is actually 3. If y'all noticed, I pushed 3 subjects into one class. I talked about music because people have been asking me about that. I talked about the misconceptions of hoodoo, because that had made me mad. I had to throw it in here. But the reason that I wrote the class about Black Magick is because I was on Facebook and there was this Christian going off about Black Magick, calling it Black Magick, blah, blah, blah. And somebody put in the comments the only reason they call it black magic is because they can't do it. And that one sentence is what made me create this class. And then I just added the other two subjects to it. So this conversation is about fear, misunderstanding, control, and cultural erasure. But throughout history, people feared what they could not understand, what they could not control, and what they failed to erase completely. And in my opinion, that is exactly what happened with our culture. As we discussed throughout this class, Black spirituality was never just about rituals. It was rhythm, emotional synchronization. I want y'all to research that. Storytelling, adaptation, survival intelligence, symbolism, collective regulation, memory preservation, and spiritual grounding developed under extreme historical conditions. A lot of what society labels as dangerous, primitive, or demonic really involved communities finding its way on its own because we didn't have a choice. And at the same time, I think modern social media has created another layer of confusion on top of what they already did to us by disconnecting people from the historical reality of African diasporic spirituality altogether. A lot of people are just playing in y'all faces, and I'm not even joking. And I hope this class will help you recognize who is doing it. Because like I said, I teach and I mind my business. So I see some shit, I'll teach it. I'll never say nobody's name. And then I hope whoever need to get the message, you get it. Okay. But I think social media has really distorted a lot of these traditions. A lot of people are now associate black magic with internet aesthetics, branding, performances, shock value, luxury spirituality. I see that a lot. I saw a practitioner say that if you ain't got money, you ain't got no spiritual power. That is not how it works at all. If you have spiritual authority, you're born with it. Like, it's not something like when I was born, I wasn't rich. That don't make no sense. I've been having my spiritual gifts since I was a kid. But anyway, that was just the most ridiculous thing. But our social media, a lot of people have social media personas instead of actual understanding of actual historical, cultural, emotional, and survival-based foundations underneath these traditions. There is a difference between aesthetic branding and ancestral tradition. There is also a difference between performance and lived cultural experience. I know, total fallacy. But anyway, aesthetic culture itself is not automatically wrong. Human beings naturally express identity visually through clothing, symbol, color. So I'm not telling y'all not to find your own aesthetic. I'm telling you not to misuse these practices in the process of showing your creativity. The problems start happening when aesthetics completely replace historical literacy, cultural understanding, community accountability, and actual spiritual depth. Sometimes people become more focused on looking spiritual than actually being spiritual. Okay, they're not understanding the historical realities, emotional intelligence, discipline, responsibility, and survival system that shaped these traditions originally. And I also think that that's why so many conversations online become disconnected from nuance. I've said this in a couple of posts already on social media. I think it was on TikTok, matter of fact. Social media rewards visibility, controversy, aesthetics, emotional reaction, and certainty. And when I say certainty, I'm talking about not really arrogance, but confidence. Okay? They have confidence. So they are pushed out into the algorithm. Okay? But people want fast answers. I remember somebody told me my music conjure series is too long. Like, the writings are too long, and they're literally less than 4,000 characters. It literally takes you 5 minutes to read less than 4,000 characters, and somebody told me it was too long, too much to read. Multiple people told me that. People want fast answers. They want simplified narratives. Instead of looking it up, if a practitioner gives you some information for free and you have additional questions, book with them or look it up yourself. Okay? But African American spirituality, hoodoo, African retention, survival adaptation, and Black cultural history are all deeply layered subjects shaped by generations of trauma, resilience, creativity, spirituality, fear, adaptation, and resistance. These conversations deserve more care than what it's getting on the internet. And honestly, this is one of the biggest reasons I wanted to teach this class in the first place. Not to tell people what y'all have to believe or what y'all have to do, but to encourage people to think deeper than what you're thinking. Study deeper. Question everybody, including me. Look the shit up yourself. And stop automatically associating Blackness with fear, danger, primitiveness. I always struggle with that word. Or spiritual corruption, without understanding where those ideas come from historically. Because after y'all start really looking at history, psychology, neuroscience, music, propaganda, like I told you, if y'all looked at my hoodoo book list, I have books on there that are for psychology, herbalism. Like, there's so many subjects. It's way more to being a hoodoo practitioner than the spiritual side. You have to actually understand human behavior. You have to understand the human body. There's so much that you have to understand. It's more than just learning about hoodoo. It's learning about life, period. But anyway, I done started preaching. I done got off script. So whether people agree with every point I made tonight or not, I hope this class at least encourages people to become more historically and internet aware, more culturally literate, emotionally intelligent, and intentional about the narratives that they repeat surrounding Black spirituality and African American and Afro-Indigenous culture moving forward. And that is the end of the class.